Hey, my name's ShawNshawN and I do sell art on ShawNshawN.co and specials on eBay. Today we're going to review Jonah Hex. So this movie is quite a while back. I just saw it last night. It's from 2010. I never heard of this film and I was like, what is this about? It's this bizarre story of this Confederate soldier and he's under the command of General Turnbull. And Turnbull, to kind of win the Civil War, one of the battles he wants to just slaughter these civilians. Jonah Hex just sees this as disgraceful and refuses to do it. And because he refuses to attack, Turnbull's son is captured and killed by the Union forces. And so Turnbull's totally, pissed off, writes off this guy, captures him, and then kills all of Jonah Hex's family in front of him. And then fast forward, 5-6 years into the future, Turnbull's kind of become a criminal on the loose. Everyone thought he was dead from the Civil War, but somehow he survived. And Jonah Hex has been branded by this guy on the side of the face, and then you go in the scene, you're like, where's the brand? There's this, he put this QT in his face, and what he did is he took an iron on top and burned it again. So he wasn't branded, but he branded himself with this terrible mark. So he has this horrible look on his face, which is realistic for the time, but maybe kind of turned off audiences. Because it definitely makes Josh Brolin look pretty ugly. I kind of like the feel of this film, in that it's like a DC comic book. It's a comic book movie. It was before a lot of the Marvel movies from 2010 till now. And so probably at the time people weren't tired of the comic book movies per se yet. But I don't know, maybe it was in the mix of when they dropped a lot of comic books. I think what really nailed the nail in the coffin for this movie was the premise that the Confederate ex-soldier is a good guy. And this is during President Obama's reign, so it probably wasn't popular at all because of that. A lot of PC culture had come out. A lot of that's related to also, they had Rodney King in '89. I think that's about the time, maybe it was '93 or so, but had the LA riots right after that. And and then people started seeing these videotapes of police beating up or killing black people, running away from the police. There's probably plenty where they got shot and it was justified, but a lot of these really badly cases where they just obviously shot them out of, complete terror, but not justified. And this really started to turn the general public's eye to, how dangerous racism was and how the police brutality was kind of systematic, maybe in the police force itself. And this left a really bad taste in people's mind, I think. And so that, you just can't get behind an ex-Confederate soldier's belief, even though it's kind of the same genre as Lincoln the Vampire Killer, which is another really fun movie. I think if this movie had been shot probably in the 70s, during the Dukes of Hazzard, Smoking the Bandit, it was a more laissez-faire version of the South at that time frame, where people had come to terms with accepting the South as it was, but, kind of saying, oh, racism is behind us, and not really showing it on TV, and so people thought it was over because it wasn't on TV, right? And this was kind of a naive approach probably of the 70s. There were, some cases back then, of course, but it just wasn't, or maybe it was because they wanted to get over what had happened in the late 60s where there was a lot of police violence on TV, and so they kind of had these funner versions of the Confederate South to kind of paper that over, I would say. But I think this film would have probably done better in the 70s because it is shot during the Obama era and people are much more sensitized to police brutality. I think people just didn't go to the cinema because of that. It's a really, in my view, it's a really fun movie. Plot is very good. Excellent acting in here. You have Josh Brolin, you have John Malkovich, Megan Fox, super hot chick. Not as great actor, but really super good looking. Michael Fassbender. So it has a really good cast. So you're like, how can I have a good cast? It's kind of based on this comic book, so you're going to have the comic book fan base maybe behind this. But yeah, just totally bombed at the box office. And I think it really gets down to this just Confederate nature of celebrating the Confederacy. And people are just like, we can't celebrate the Confederacy, dude. We got to tear all those statues down. Which, I'm not against at all. And I think that is the right way to approach it. They shouldn't be celebrating Confederate soldiers. They lost the war for a reason. They were defending, slavery, which is horrible. So that kind of has, because they've taken the other side versus celebrating a Union soldier, I think this movie would have been much more successful versus a Confederate soldier. But it is what it is, I think as far as what the story they worked with, they did a really good job. It's kind of like one of those surprises is like John Carter on Mars. They totally screwed that up too. But that was a really fun movie, I thought. And This, I had a similar feel, or if you get beyond the kind of Confederate links, you know, it's directly related to Civil War, you're like, yeah, these guys are like defending slavery, dude. These guys, you know, if you get beyond that, then yeah, it's a fun movie. So I think it's just the tainted nature of, you know, these guys were probably slave owners defending slavery. It wasn't like 1960s, 4 or 5 generations beyond, and you're like, all right, these guys are just some racist guys, and you can kind of see beyond that maybe at that level, but if these are right from the Civil War, dude, these are as racist as it gets. And they were defending slavery, you know, it's as straight up as that. So I think just that nature really killed this film. In the beginning, Act 1, they have this kind of comic book style. So to make the movie, I think, move faster, they kind of shoot it in a comic book style, which is really fun. But it's kind of weird in the sense they only have like a little bit in Act 1, and then they just revert to real live action for the rest of the film. So I don't know, to me, if you're going to use comic book, kind of sprinkle it throughout. I think when they did Into the Spider-Verse, where it's all animation, but they have this comic book feel, kind of more of a live action, but animation style, and then back and forth between that. That's like such a cool concept, and it never been taken full. So this is before, you know, Spider-Verse, you know, by 7-8 years. And they just kind of put a little section in so you know it's a comic book feel. So, you know, it's fine. I mean, that's what they were working with at the time, and that's what was probably accepted. But I think it just didn't work because they only do it in Act 1, right? If they had done it either shorter or, you know, more interspersed with the rest of the film, it might have had some kind of fun feel to it. But I think it made kind of a cornball feel in the film a little bit. And one of the really cool features is Jonah Hex, because he was almost starved to death on this cross, he is able to talk to the dead. So that's kind of how he detects where General Turnbull and tracks him down, right, through all these dead people. That's kind of fun, and it has a supernatural feel to the film, which is really cool. That doesn't bother me so much. I don't see any issues with that. You know, the acting's just phenomenal, I think. And the plot, they had a lot of, you know, twists and turns, and Turnbull's this really terrible Confederate general turned vigilante. Yeah, he's not a really good guy, and it really comes across. But yeah, I think the fact that just that Josh Brolin is playing this character who's this Confederate soldier of honor, you're like, yeah, but you're defending slavery. It doesn't matter if you don't want to kill civilians. I mean, you still were pro-slavery, right? So I think just that element of being pro-slavery and the timing of this film isn't good. It just should have come, not from an editing perspective. Editing is phenomenal. It's only an hour, 21 minutes. It's really a really tightly woven plot, and, you know, it comes across really well. There's no dead spots in this film. So from an editing perspective, spot on. I think it's just, you know, they should have done this in the 1970s. This would have been more acceptable. And, you know, the 70s was kind of, you know, papering over the violence of the 60s with kind of these cornball versions of the South, like Smoking the Bandit and Dukes of Hazzard. It's kind of papering over the white supremacy issue of that day. And people just wanted to forget the violence of the 60s. And right now we're kind of in the Me Too movement, Black Lives Matter, and it's not the right time for that film. I think maybe if there was like a really bad LA riots and then people wanted to forget, this might work. But yeah, nowadays it was the wrong time for this. It's an interesting concept, but I think, yeah, people just do not accept these kind of films anymore. So it has kind of that tinge of blackface, you would say, because it has a really good black actor in here. The guy, I don't remember his name, but he's the guy from the chief of, we just saw it last night, some detective, Bosch. So he's the chief of police, and he's only in a bit part, but he's like a really phenomenal, kind of hard as nails. And he's in there, and he kind of plays a similar character, but you're like, dude, you guys were just ex-slaves. You wouldn't have that tenacity per se. I mean, you could, but it just doesn't seem likely under the slave conditions. Like, you're just freed, you'd be a little bit, you kind of like, you slowly evolve. Not that they don't have the mental capacity to be here, it's just, you know, they're just like, they just got a slavery. It's like, oh, am I free? Am I not free? And then you're freer and freer and freer. Kind of how Bob Marley talked about, you know, mental slavery is in your mind phrase, and that's very true. You know, it takes generation to kind of unwind that. There are a few people that got out of it right away. Not out of it, but were able to break from that, like Frederick Douglass, and obviously, you know, there was some, you know, like people that led, you know, Underground Railroad, Harriet Tubman, and other people like that nature, and they had really, you know, expanded their mind. But in the majority, you know, they were free, but they weren't free. They were very cautious, and the nature of the Civil War, people didn't really settle. You know, obviously everyone knows that by the 1920s, which is about 30-40 years after the Civil War, they formed like the height of the KKK. So you don't really have this acceptance within white culture for what happened with the Civil War. They didn't really accept it, and it wasn't until civil rights movement in the 60s and going on. So, you know, this film is just came out in the wrong decade. I think in the 1970s, this could have been a popular film before, you know, again, it was like the 70s were kind of papering over the violence of the 60s, and this film would have been more successful, I think, back then. More people were more accepting of these type of genre, but yeah, during the Obama, and then, you know, people just didn't accept it anymore, which, you know, is a good thing. You know, society's evolving to a higher nature of, you know, the past deeds of slavery and the Civil War and how people should really be expected, and not glorifying ex-Confederate soldiers, even if it is a comic book. So, yeah, I think the Hollywoods was looking for kind of like, oh, Vampire Killer, Lincoln the Vampire was successful, let's roll out something similar, which they rolled out something similar. And in comic books, people can, this is like a guilty pleasure, right? You can read it in the closet, no one's gonna know. But if you go to the cinema, you have to go to the cinema, you tell your friends you went to the cinema, they're like, oh, you went to see this Confederate soldiers celebrate slavery? It's kind of like, well, it's publicly admitting you're a racist, right, nowadays, so yeah, that's kind of not going to fly, I think, with a lot of people. But yeah, I think the more the PC culture, which is a good thing as far as this kind of film. It's a good film, but yeah, just because of the nature, it's like you're rooting for ex-Confederate soldier. You know, you can be honorific, but you stood for slavery, so how honorific can you be? And I think they use this branding across Rollin. It makes cool for the effect, but I think what they should have done, instead of branding his face, they should have branded his soldier, and then he would cover it up, or his arm or something, so you'd see it, but it wasn't like it distorted his face. I mean, that was probably true to the comic book, but to look at this really disgusting face the whole film, I think that also made for a hard to watch film. You know, they use it in Quentin Tarantino's, he covers the Nazis and they're Nazi hunters, and they put the Nazi swastika right in their thing, you know, but he's good into the Nazis, right? So it's like the good guys are kind of evil, but not as bad as the Nazis, right? And the Nazis are kind of seen as the good guys, but so he's flipped kind of the formula, but still the Nazis are the Nazis, right? And so the victims of the carvings are the Nazis. So you're still like, well, we're voting for the good side. They're not really the good guys because they're kind of behind the field doing these really devious acts, but they're fighting for the overall good fight, right? Whereas this side, you're like, oh, this guy's fighting a Confederate general. Great. Oh, he's an ex-Confederate soldier. Well, he was pro-slavery. Got to overlook that a little bit. And then he marries an Indian woman. You're like, so he fought for the Confederacy, but then he's married to an Indian woman. That's another, I think, flaw in the film, is if he were a Confederate soldier, I don't think you would have married an Indian woman. Maybe you would have. I mean, there were people that just fought, so to say, for their land and for the South versus the North, but the majority joined because they're defending slavery. It's just point and simple, blank as that. You know, the poor whites that joined that didn't have slaves, they were fighting to preserve their kind of status quo within society, that they were better. And those guys ultimately became, like, these disenfranchised white became the basis of the KKK. So, you know, what are you kind of defending? You know, it's like, I think that's just the fatal flaw of this movie. You know, it's well acted, the story's good, timing's good, coloring's fine, you know, the comic book feels kind of okay. I think it's fun. But yeah, just the Confederate nature, you just can't get behind a Confederate soldier. I saw it as just, you know, a good look film, but yeah, if you think about it on a deeper level, I think that's what really tanked this movie. Anyway, that's my review of Jonah Hex. Hopefully you guys like it. Give me a thumbs up. If you want to subscribe, you can subscribe below. See you in the next movie review. Thanks for watching, guys.